From KGW News, this is Straight Talk with Laurel Porter.
Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter. The relationship between Republicans and Democrats at the Oregon Legislature has been, well, let's say a little bit tense over recent years. Republicans hold a minority of seats in both the Oregon House and Senate. For the past 3 years, they staged walkouts as a tactic to either kill Democratic proposals they didn't like or in protest. But this past short legislative session was different. Amid new leadership, there were no walkouts. Could it signal a new spirit of cooperation? A couple of weeks ago, we heard from the new Speaker of the House, Representative Dan Rayfield of Corvallis. He took over after former Speaker Tina Kotek resigned to focus on her campaign for governor. And on the Republican side, the minority party in the House also has a new leader, Representative Vikki Breese Iverson of Prineville, who succeeds Christine Drazen, who, like Kotek, resigned to put her full attention on her run for governor. Breese Iverson's deputy leader is Representative Kim Wallen of Medford in Southern Oregon. In this episode of Straight Talk, we get their take on the past short legislative session, the relationship with their Democratic colleagues, and we look ahead to the impact the election could have on the next session. I'm pleased to welcome my guests, House Republican Leader Vikki Breese Iverson and House Republican Caucus Deputy Leader Representative Kim Wallen of Medford. Welcome to Straight Talk. It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you for having us. It's great to be here.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
When House Speaker Dan Rayfield was on the show, I asked him to grade the session, and he gave it an A-. He said, nothing's perfect. There's always room for improvement. How would you grade it and why? Let's begin with Leader Breese Iverson.
Short session really hasn't been around for that long, and the intention of short session was to create a time for the legislators to come back to the Capitol and to do budgetary fixes, technical fixes, and do some agency oversight. And if we look at what we're doing in short session in this last short session per se, but really in recent years, we aren't doing what the intention of short session was about. So I think we can do better. I think we should look at what the intention of short session was, and we should get back to what it was supposed to be.
What grade would you give it?
It would not be good. It would be more in the D range.
D. All right. Representative Kim Wallen, what grade would you give it and why?
I think we did both too much and too little, and so but in a lot of bad ways. So I would not call it a passing grade. So I guess in the D range myself.
Well, let's dig into some of the factors that led to those D grades and how it might have been improved. The state had a huge amount of money to work with an unexpected surge in revenues. The legislature passed 130 bills, spent more than $2.5 billion. And Representative Breese Iverson, you called it an overreach. And when Speaker Rayfield was on the show recently, I read him a quote from you where you said Democrats prevented Republicans from accomplishing more for Oregonians, that they did overreach and passed, in your words, an eye-watering spending plan. I'll play his response to that and then get your reaction.
And again, I respect Leader Breese Iverson, but when you get to the end, we had a historic ending fund balance of $760 million. That's more than when Republicans were in control. That's more than when in prior cycles when Democrats were in control. On top of that, we also have reserve accounts. We have 2.7, I think when you add it all up, around $2.7 billion in reserves. We are one of the best states in the nation set up to weather a significant economic downturn.
And he ended again by saying he respects your leadership, Leader Breese Iverson. But what do you think about his comments addressing the state's pressing needs as it tries to recover from the pandemic, and having that much money in reserves is pretty good, isn't it?
On the surface, it looks great. But what I would suggest we need to consider is how we got those dollars. We got those dollars by taxing Oregonians. And I think that as we look at what we are facing and potential downturn, we should be looking at how do we give some of that money back to the Oregonians that worked hard to earn it in the first place.
And Representative Wallen, what do you think about his comments?
I agree that a lot of that money was federal money. So it wasn't just that we had weathered the downturn. We're borrowing that against future generations to pay that back. We're going to be paying it back in inflation. We're already seeing that. And some of those reserve funds that he discussed, those are creatures of the legislature. We can put more or less money in those. And you also have to look at the fact that anytime that money has gone to the state and then it gets dispersed back out to individual communities for projects, you're going to have a lot of lack of accountability and a lot of waste. And if communities want those projects, they can tax themselves locally for those projects and have a much more direct impact on their own communities without having to have the money have washed through the state government first.
So you would have liked to have seen the legislature save even more money than that?
Or send it back to the taxpayers. That's, as Republicans, that's what we would have done. We would have sent it back to its rightful owners.
Are there some bills you really think should have been passed or considered that didn't or weren't considered? We'll begin with Representative Wallen. What would you have liked to have seen?
I would have liked to have seen a serious consideration of reducing the cat tax, at least at pharmacies. That the commercial activity tax passed in 2019 was, it's a tax on gross receipts, not on profits, not on net gain in a business. And that has phased in slowly, and it really came to fruition in the last few months. I have really been hearing a lot about the pain that the cat tax is causing. And the place where it's really being felt is at our pharmacies. And you'll notice, maybe not in the metro area here, but around the state, pharmacies have closed. Lots of pharmacies have closed, and they've reduced their hours. And it's getting very difficult to get a prescription, even in an area that is kind of the hub of Southern Oregon in Medford. So the pharmacies asked us to relieve them of their cat tax burden. They said that was the thing that pushed them over the edge. And we had a bill to eliminate it. And instead of eliminating the cat tax for pharmacies, while we have this big crisis, we eliminated it for 2 or 3 years, which is not really enough to bring businesses back into that sector. So that was a bill that really needed to pass, in my opinion.
Do you think those 2 or 3 years, that tax holiday, will help? Is it something you could revisit in the next session?
Hopefully we can extend it in the next session. I don't think it's going to alleviate the immediate problem, no.
And something else that you mentioned to me that you wish that you would have addressed, that the legislature would have, is the lack of public defenders. We've been hearing about that in Portland and a lot of counties as well.
Right, that was beefed up somewhat. And I will say that I don't find it to be in conflict with my belief that we spent too much money, saying that we should have spent more money on criminal defense lawyers. That's a constitutional burden that we have to make sure that criminal defendants have a right, they have a right to counsel, and that is to be paid for at the public expense. And our judicial branch, generally, our judges are underpaid, and we need to address that. Just generally speaking, the third branch of government, the judicial branch, did not get treated very well by the legislative branch. And I'm very disappointed with that outcome.
And Leader Breese Iverson, you told me you think lawmakers should have gotten serious about addressing the drought. And we have a graphic showing just how bad it is in Oregon. The dark color you see here represents, that burgundy color represents exceptional drought, touching 11 different counties, especially bad in your home of Prineville in Crook County. What do you wish the legislature had done?
In the December special session, we had a conversation about how the drought had affected us last year, and we provided some relief to those that were most adversely affected. We provided some relief to those that had to find some alternative domestic well options, and I think that was phase one. And in a conversation with the governor leading into that special session and into then Speaker of the House at the time, there was an acknowledgement that was the beginning of the conversation. And what was very lacking during this short session was phase two of that conversation. We know before we even get into the growing season that we are in this drought scenario for yet another year. And if we don't have that conversation before we're on the other side of this year, we will have lost a lot of our ag industry.
And speaking of the ag industry, when it comes to a bill you oppose, the Overtime for Farm Workers bill was probably the most contentious. It provides overtime for Oregon farm workers who work more than a 40-hour week. Opponents say it could drive farmers out of business. Speaker Rayfield said the bill phases in that overtime over a period of years, and it provides refundable tax credits, 1-for-1 on the dollar. Let's listen to what he told me when I talked about that with him on Straight Talk, and then I'll get your response.
So I expect the impacts to be minimal. And that, frankly, was one of our biggest goals, is how do we make sure that we support our small farms? How do we make sure that we support our dairy industry? And I feel very confident that the way the program is created, with also some report back periods, we'll be able to be nimble as the legislature to make sure that those impacts aren't felt the way that some, I think, initially were worried that they might be felt.
Representative Wallen, do those report backs give you some reassurance? Do you think the legislature can be nimble in response?
I think that's an interesting comment from the speaker, because his own colleagues, the Democrats, during the debate on the bill on the floor of the House, they were very concerned, actually, that it's going to have significant impacts on food prices, on small farms, either going out of business or mechanizing so that they can get their crops in. The concerns voiced on the House floor were that we didn't quite get the right answer, that we might have moved too quickly, that maybe we didn't have all of the people at the table who needed to be discussing this, that farm worker pay would be capped rather than, the farmers only have so much money, so that's going to cap their wages. It's not actually going to increase their wages. These were all concerns voiced by Democrats, concerns that we will have to come back and tweak this because it probably didn't do what needs to be done. There was even a tax credit in addition to, there were 2 tax credits actually worked into the final budget because of concerns over how this might raise prices and the impacts it might have. So no, the report backs alone are not going to do the trick as far as I'm concerned.
Well, Leader Breese Iverson, don't farm workers, though, deserve the same pay and protections other workers get under the Fair Labor Standards Acts of 1938?
If we look at ag industry, we need to look at how ag happens, and there's so many different sectors, and Oregon is known for such a huge diversity of sectors in and under the ag industry. Each one of those sectors has a different harvest time, a different critical time, or quiet time, if you will, in that industry. For instance, if you're a crop producer and you have a planting time, then there's a time of letting things grow, maybe managing the weeds or something to that effect, but then we get into a time where we actually have a harvest. There are so many factors that come into play when we go through a year in any of the ag industry. We have to manage our operational plan, but at the same time, we can't manage Mother Nature. So we don't always get to say, this is the plan for the year, and then go through the year according to just that plan. We have to be able to be flexible in the middle of the year when the rains come and we need to get the fruit off the trees before the fruit rots. These are things that if we try to pigeonhole one way of handling an industry and not allow for the flexibility that has to occur because of the nuances of ag, then we're really cutting the ability for that industry to exist in Oregon.
Well, even though you were opposed to this bill, in the end, the discourse was passionate but civil, no walkout. What was different this time?
I think it's very simple. When we experienced a walkout the last time, we walked out for a specific issue. And we in fact were able to stop that issue during that short session. 2 weeks after we came back from the sine die date of that session, the governor put an executive order into play that in essence created the very issue that we walked out over. And what is in front of us with this ag overtime conversation is that should we have walked out, Boley was already starting plans to enact what would be the new regulations or laws for this industry.
Well, let's talk about the relationship between the parties and leadership. Democrats, since they control the purse strings, pretty much control how all that money's spent. But Speaker Rayfield tried something different. He offered $100 million for infrastructure projects in rural Oregon with no strings attached. Representative Wallen, what did you think about that?
Well, it got mischaracterized as a Republican, well, some people characterized it as a buy-off, some people characterized it as a bridge, but it was not just Republicans. There are Democrats in rural areas, and they were included in the discussion. It wasn't something we had asked for, so it didn't feel like an olive branch to us necessarily. A lot of our constituents don't necessarily want it. It was perceived by some of them as a buy-off to stop us from walking out. Of course, it was not that. Those two things were not related whatsoever, but I don't think that it was anything that it was billed as.
Well, I asked Speaker Rayfield about the relationship this session between the parties, and here's what he said.
And I feel very fortunate, frankly, to have Minority Leader Breese Iverson. She was wonderful. None of us are perfect in these roles, right? And we learned from each other, and we're able to work very well with each other, even when there were bills that the minority didn't really want us to pass. We were able to do it in a way that respected each other, and in a way where we respected the dialogue and understood that we all have and shares the same values.
Representative Breese Iverson, do you agree with Speaker Rayfield's assessment? And could this signal a new spirit of cooperation?
I would 100% agree that my experience with Speaker Rayfield was vastly different than my experience with his predecessor. I do think that there is genuineness to work across the aisle and to have better conversations at all. And I appreciate that. I appreciated the open access that I had in trying to get through short session with Speaker Rayfield. And I do look forward to having a better conversation as we move forward, and especially as I move into his speaker position and he gets into the minority party.
Well, we'll talk about that after the break, about the future. That is hopeful for this spirit of cooperation. When we come back, we'll talk about history made by Republican women in the Oregon State House and how the upcoming election could impact the legislature. We're back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter. We're talking with two of the Republican leaders in the Oregon House about the recently completed short legislative session, and we look ahead to the future. Welcome once again to my guest, House Minority Leader Vikki Breese Iverson of Prineville and Deputy Republican Caucus Leader Kim Wallen from Medford. Once again, it's really nice to have you here, and I want to talk a little bit about history made. Representative Wallen and Representative Breese Iverson, you made some history as the first all-women Oregon House Republican Caucus team in state history, and you have a strong voice from Southern Oregon. Representative Wallen, as I mentioned, you're from Medford, and the third in command, the whip, State Representative Lily Morgans from Grants Pass. What does that mean to you and to your constituents, Representative Wallen?
I honestly didn't even think about it when we all got elected. It was an honor to be chosen by our colleagues to be their leader, and I loved Norma Paulus. She was a professor of mine at Willamette, and I love the idea of doing something to honor, that she was just a remarkable person, and so I feel honored to maybe follow in her footsteps a tiny bit. But it's an honor, and now it's up to us to execute what our colleagues expect from us.
And Leader Breese Iverson, what does it mean to you to have an all-women leadership team?
I have to concur with Representative Wallen's comments. It was a scenario that was not top of the mind until it was pointed out. I am truly honored that our colleagues did choose to have myself, Representative Wallen, and Representative Morgan all as part of the leadership team, and that they trust us and put their faith in us to do and to execute the good of the whole. And that's exactly what our intentions are, what our hearts are, and what we'll continue to do. The fact that we're all women is just the bonus.
And this was your first time as minority leader. What was it like to take the reins?
It was an interesting experience. The vote happened literally right on the heels of the phone call from the governor calling us to a special session. So there was no time to get used to this new leadership position. It was all in, all at once. And if there's ever a fire hose that you drink out of to learn the process, that's exactly what I experienced. I have wonderful colleagues in the House and in the Republican caucus that helped. We used the strengths that were at the table and helped me do absolutely what we needed to do to meet special session in December and do what we could for Oregonians. And moving from there into short session, we continue to unite as a team and move forward as a united front.
And a Republican hasn't held the governor's office for 4 decades. You alluded to this earlier. During the next session, there will be a new governor in 2023. How optimistic are you it will be a Republican? Leader Breese Iverson.
I'm extremely optimistic. We have some great candidates that are in the run for governor. I'm excited to see what comes out of the primary. And I think Oregonians are very ready for change. It's time. We have seen some real failures in the Democrat leadership for Oregon in the last 2 decades, and we're living that now. And it's time for us to get back to some traditional core Oregon values. And I believe that we've got that in front of us with the next Republican governor.
And you've told me you're not endorsing anybody in the primary. Representative Wallen, there's something like 19 candidates. Are you backing anyone?
I personally am backing Christine Drazen, who was our leader, our caucus leader, before she resigned to run for governor, and put that, which is how Representative Breese Iverson became the leader. So
if there were,
and I too.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
If there were a Republican governor, I'll just jump in here. If there were a Republican governor, how will that affect the next legislative session, do you think, in 2023? Kim?
Oh, I think it would be a significant change. And I do agree that Oregonians are ready to move back to, even though we haven't had a Republican governor, we have had super majorities of Republicans in that time in the legislature. So Oregonians do vote for Republicans. It's not completely out of the question. And it would change. I think the main thing that would change if there was a Republican in the governor's office is that the executive agencies that carry out the legislation that we pass, I think that you would see some changes, more accountability. There just hasn't been any accountability because of the one party continually appointing and the directors and so forth of those agencies. So I think you would see some change in the agencies and just how the execution is managed of the legislation we pass.
We don't have a lot of time left, but I wanted to ask Leader Breese Iverson about education, because that was such a big concern during the pandemic. What would you have liked to have seen addressed during the legislature in about a minute?
Thank you. Education is so important for Oregonians, and as a mother of 2 teenage boys, I can tell you I firsthand watched what we've done to our kids in the last 2 years, as we haven't had them in school 5 days a week around their friends. And it's such an integral part of growing up is to go through some experiences with peers and learn from them. And then you figure out who you are. And as we didn't have kids in school, and we have really, in my opinion, downgraded our education system by our standards, we need to do better for our kids so that we can see Oregon thrive. And we missed the mark on that this session.
And I want to give you each just a little bit of time for a final thought, about 30 seconds. Representative Wallen.
Well, I touched on it just a minute ago, and we talked about it at the beginning. Accountability is sorely lacking. We don't have enough oversight of our agencies, because one of the things the legislature does is pass legislation and then monitor how the executive does execute those laws. And we haven't done a good enough job in holding people accountable on that.
And Leader Breese Iverson, about 30 seconds.
I think that we have a great opportunity in front of us in the next, after this election cycle, to really change the flavor for Oregon, and the accountability, the agenda setting for what we're going to see in this next election cycle, or excuse me, this next legislative cycle. And as Oregonians speak out and we see a change in the leadership in Oregon, I think we're going to find an amazing Oregon that really reflects some of the traditional Oregon that brought us to where we were 10 years ago.
Well, thank you both for joining us here on Straight Talk. It's been a pleasure. And thank you for watching. Join us next week when we take a look at Oregon's mental health system and how recent legislation is hoping to make a difference. We'll see you next week for Straight Talk. Have a great week.